Clara held the private investigator's final report in her hand, the thick manila envelope feeling impossibly heavy, a dead weight pulling her arm toward the polished marble floor of her immaculate kitchen. She had expected so many things. A grainy photograph of her husband, Liam, with another woman, a list of clandestine hotel check-ins, a transcript of intimate, betraying phone calls. She had steeled herself for the sickening lurch of heartbreak, the hot flash of rage. What she had not prepared for was the single typed sentence on the cover page, a statement so bizarre, so utterly disconnected from the reality she knew, that it felt like a line from a madman's play. The investigator, a gruff but thorough man named Marcus Thorne, had summarized his findings with brutal efficiency. The sentence read, "Subject is not engaged in an extramarital affair. Subject is in the final stages of a hostile takeover of Harlow Construction." Harlow Construction, her father's company, the bedrock of her family's identity, the source of their immense wealth, the monument to her father's unassailable genius. And Liam, her quiet, unassuming husband, the moderately successful architect she loved, but also secretly pitied, was buying it? The idea was less a thought and more a rupture in the fabric of the universe. It was impossible. It was ludicrous. Liam designed boutique homes and renovated historical libraries. He wore worn corduroy jackets and spent his evenings sketching in a notebook with a simple fountain pen. He couldn't orchestrate a corporate acquisition any more than he could fly to the moon. Her mind, reeling, rejected the information. Thorne had to be mistaken. Or worse, he was mocking her. But as her eyes scanned the first few pages of the detailed report, filled with encrypted financial data, shell corporation names, and a timeline of transactions that made her stomach clench, a cold, terrifying dread began to seep into the cracks of her disbelief. Liam, the man she thought she was worried about losing to another woman, was a stranger, and he was not just a stranger. He was a threat, a phantom force moving against the very foundations of her world. The betrayal she had braced for was there, but it was 1,000 times more complex and devastating than a simple affair. It was a betrayal of identity, a betrayal of everything she thought she knew. We know how this story ends for people like Clara's father, but do we know how it begins? If you love stories where the underestimated rise up and the arrogant get what's coming to them, you're in the right place. Do me a quick favor, tap that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's go back 3 months, to the dinner party, where the first seeds of this spectacular downfall were sown. The air in the Harlow dining room was always thick with the scent of money, a subtle perfume of expensive floral arrangements, aged leather, and the faint metallic tang of ambition. It was Richard Harlow's 65th birthday, and the long mahogany table was laden with crystal and silver, reflecting the warm, strategic lighting that made everyone look both powerful and unforgiving. Liam sat quietly, a small island of calm in a sea of boisterous self-congratulation. He nursed a glass of water, the wine having been poured with a pointed hesitation by the sommelier under Richard's watchful eye. "Another library, Liam?" Richard boomed from the head of the table, his voice a practiced instrument of casual dominance. He had a way of asking questions that were not questions at all, but verdicts. Still fiddling with dusty old books and crooked floorboards, a few of Clara's cousins snickered. Liam offered a small, placid smile. "It's a beautiful historical building, Richard, the city archives. It's an honor to be trusted with its preservation." Richard waved a dismissive hand, a large gold signet ring flashing under the chandelier. "Preservation, restoration, noble pursuits, I suppose, for those who lack the vision to build, to create something from nothing. That's where the real legacy is, my boy, not in propping up what's already crumbling." He turned his gaze to the rest of the table, a king addressing his court. "Speaking of which, the Phoenix Tower project is officially greenlit. We break ground in 6 weeks. It will be the tallest residential building in the state, a new star in the skyline." A round of applause and murmurs of admiration filled the room. Clara, seated beside Liam, reached over and squeezed her father's arm. "That's incredible, Daddy. Congratulations." She beamed, her pride genuine. Then she glanced at Liam, a flicker of something, apology, embarrassment, in her eyes. She wanted him to be impressed, to join the chorus of adulation. But Liam was just watching Richard, his expression unreadable. He saw the man for what he was, a builder of monuments to his own ego. The Phoenix Tower was a marvel of engineering, yes, but it was also a soulless glass spike designed to cast a shadow over everything smaller. That's quite an achievement, Liam said, his voice even and measured. It carried no trace of the awe everyone else was performing. The lack of deference did not go unnoticed. Richard's smile tightened. It is. It's the kind of achievement that secures a family's future for generations. It's built on risk, on daring, not on city-funded stipends for patching up old brickwork. The insult was clear. A perfectly aimed dart. Liam felt Clara flinch beside him. He felt her desperate wish for him to say something clever, to defend himself, or at the very least to look suitably chastened. But he did neither. He simply took a slow sip of water, his calm a stark contrast to the aggressive energy radiating from his father-in-law. Inside his jacket pocket, his fingers found the cool, smooth barrel of his fountain pen. It was a vintage Mont Blanc, a gift from his late mentor, a man who had taught him that the strength of a structure wasn't in its height, but in the integrity of its foundation. He rolled it between his thumb and forefinger, a silent, grounding ritual. Clara saw his silence not as strength, but as weakness. She saw the smirks on her cousins' faces and felt a hot wave of shame. Why couldn't he just play the game? Why couldn't he, for one night, show the ambition her family so prized? Later that night, as they drove home in the quiet luxury of their car, the tension was a third passenger. "You could have tried a little, Liam," she said, her voice tight. "You know how he is. He was just trying to include you." "By insulting my profession?" Liam asked softly, his eyes on the road. "He doesn't understand it. He sees things in terms of scale. Billions of dollars, hundreds of floors. You have to translate for him. Tell him about your ambitions, your big plans." Liam was silent for a long moment. His big plans. If she only knew. "My work speaks for itself, Clara, to those who care to listen." "But they don't listen," she shot back, her frustration boiling over. "They see you sitting there quietly while my father talks about changing the skyline, and they think you're content, that you have no drive." The word hung in the air between them. Failure. He pulled into their driveway, the house dark and waiting. He turned to her, his face illuminated by the dim glow of the dashboard. "Is that what you think?" he asked, his voice devoid of accusation. It was a genuine question, and that made it all the more painful. "No," she said too quickly. "Of course not. I worry. They're my family. I want them to see you the way I do." But as Liam looked at her, he saw the lie. She didn't see him the way she used to. She saw him through her father's eyes. She saw a man of small projects and smaller ambitions. The seed of doubt, planted by Richard and watered by her own insecurities, had taken root, and it was in that moment, in the suffocating silence of their car, that Liam knew his quiet experiment had to come to an end. He had wanted to build a life with her based on who he was, not what he had. He had kept his true success a secret, a firewall against the corrosive influence of her family's wealth. He wanted to be sure her love for him was foundational, not decorative. But the foundation was cracking, and her next move, born of that same doubt, would be the one to bring the entire structure down. It was only a week later that she made the call to Marcus Thorne, private investigator, setting in motion the very thing she thought she was trying to prevent, the complete and utter demolition of her world. The following weeks saw the pressure escalate, a slow, methodical tightening of a vice. The setting for the next humiliation was the Harlow family's annual charity gala, a glittering affair held at the city's most exclusive country club. Liam had always disliked these events. They were not about charity. They were about the public performance of virtue. It was a stage, and he was perpetually miscast. He stood in a tuxedo that felt like a costume, a glass of champagne in his hand that he had no intention of drinking. Clara was a vision in emerald silk, moving through the crowd with an easy grace he admired, but tonight she seemed to keep a careful distance from him, as if he were a liability. Richard Harlow, holding court near the grand staircase, spotted Liam alone and strode over, two of his board members in tow. He clapped a heavy hand on Liam's shoulder. "Gentlemen, I'd like you to meet my son-in-law, Liam, the architect." He said the word architect with the same faint condescension a king might use to introduce the court jester. The two men, both in their late 60s with the soft, well-fed look of lifelong executives, gave Liam polite but dismissive nods. "A pleasure," one of them murmured, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more important. "Liam here is a master of the intimate," Richard continued, his smile wide and predatory. "Aren't you, my boy? Quaint little houses, historical refurbishments, very artisanal." The word was meant to sting, to equate his work with a hobby, like knitting or pottery. I keep telling him, you have to think bigger. Scale is the only thing that matters. Legacy. Liam met Richard's gaze. There was no anger in his eyes, only a sort of clinical observation. It was like watching a predictable weather pattern. "There's a different kind of legacy in preserving beauty, Richard. Some things are worth more than their square footage." Richard laughed, a loud, booming sound that drew more attention. "Hear that? A poet. My son-in-law is a poet who works with bricks and mortar. Tell me, Liam, what's the biggest budget you've ever managed? $250,000? $500,000? Before Liam could answer, Richard plowed on. "The plumbing budget for the first 10 floors of the Phoenix Tower is $12 million. The plumbing." He turned back to his companions. "It's a different universe. You can't expect someone who builds dollhouses to understand how to build an empire." The men chuckled knowingly. It was a dismissal, a public emasculation wrapped in the guise of a jovial lesson. Liam felt the familiar burn of humiliation, not for himself, but for Clara, who he saw watching from across the room. Her face was a mask of strained nonchalance, her posture rigid. She had heard every word, and she had done nothing. She turned away, engaging in an animated conversation with an old family friend, the glitter of her dress a painful starburst in his vision. She was abandoning him on the battlefield. He didn't need her to fight for him. He had never needed that. But he had hoped she would stand with him. Her failure to do so was a deeper cut than any of Richard's brutish insults. It confirmed a terrible truth. Her loyalty was conditional, her courage non-existent. He excused himself quietly, the board members barely registering his departure. He walked out onto a deserted terrace overlooking the golf course, the manicured green unnaturally bright under the floodlights. The cool night air was a relief. He reached into his jacket, his hand closing around the familiar shape of his fountain pen. He unscrewed the cap, the motion precise and automatic. He wasn't a poet who worked with bricks. He was a strategist who built systems. Richard saw buildings as monuments to himself. Liam saw them as living ecosystems, intricate networks of capital, logistics, and human endeavor. And Richard's ecosystem was deeply, fatally flawed. It was over-leveraged, dependent on his singular cult of personality, and blind to the changing market. It was a beautiful, towering structure with a crumbling foundation. He looked back through the glass doors at the party. He saw Clara laughing, a perfect portrait of happiness. But he could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hand as she raised her glass. She was performing just like everyone else. She was playing her part in the Grand Harlow drama, a part that required her to stand by the strong and discard the weak. The pity he felt was no longer for himself, but for her. She was trapped in a gilded cage and didn't even know it. Unseen by him, from the shadows of a service entrance 50 yards away, a man raised a camera with a long telephoto lens. Marcus Thorne snapped a few pictures of Liam standing alone on the terrace. The initial request from Clara had been simple: find out who he's sleeping with. But Thorne's instincts, honed over 20 years of surveillance, told him this was different. Liam's demeanor wasn't that of a man sneaking around. It was the demeanor of a man waiting. He was too calm, too self-contained. Cheating husbands were nervous, twitchy. They checked their phones constantly. They looked over their shoulders. Liam looked like he owned the very ground he stood on. Thorne lowered his camera, a frown creasing his brow. This wasn't a simple infidelity case. He had a feeling it was something far more interesting. He had been paid to follow a straying husband. He was beginning to suspect he was actually tracking a predator. The next morning, Liam's routine was, on the surface, exactly as Claire understood it. He left their comfortable suburban home at 8 a.m., drove his sensible sedan into the city, and disappeared into a modest 3-story brick building in a respectable but unglamorous district. The sign on the door read, Liam Kincaid, Architect. Claire had been there once years ago. She remembered a small, slightly cluttered office with a drafting table, rolls of blueprints, and the smell of coffee and old paper. It was the office of a man who did honest, respectable work. It was not the office of a titan of industry, but Marcus Thorne, parked across the street in a nondescript van, saw what Clara never could. He watched Liam enter the building. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Liam did not emerge. No clients came or went. Thorne checked the building directory he'd photographed the day before. Liam's office was Suite 201, but there were other tenants. Law firms, a small accounting practice, nothing that screamed secret life. Still, his gut told him something was off. The man's stillness at the gala, his utter lack of reaction to his father-in-law's public taunts. It was the calm of a man holding all the cards. Inside, Liam walked up to the second floor, unlocked the door to Suite 201, and stepped in. The office was exactly as Clara remembered it, because it was a stage. It was a meticulously crafted illusion of modest success. He walked past the drafting table, through a small back room filled with filing cabinets, and stopped at what looked like a solid brick wall. He pressed a finger against a specific brick, a faint click echoing in the silent room. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing not a hidden safe, but a private stainless steel elevator. The door slid shut behind him, and the elevator descended, not up, but down, deep into the bedrock of the city. The doors opened again into a different world. The air was cool and filtered. The space was a vast, minimalist expanse of polished concrete, glass, and dark walnut. This was the true heart of his operation. It was the headquarters of a company that didn't officially exist, known in the highest circles of international finance only by its codename, Ethelred. The name was a private joke, a nod to an old English king known for his grand building projects. The space was silent, save for the low hum of servers and the quiet footsteps of the handful of elite staff who operated the firm. He walked into the central conference room. A holographic display shimmered in the center of a massive stone table. A woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a severe black dress turned to greet him. This was Isabel Vance, the public face of Ethelred, the one whose name appeared in the financial press, the one who terrified boards and liquidated assets. To the world, she was the brilliant, ruthless founder. In reality, she was his partner, his strategist, and his oldest friend. "Good morning, Liam," she said, her voice crisp. "Ready to topple an empire before lunch?" "Just a routine status check, Isabel," he replied, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "How is our friend Richard Harlow this morning?" Isabel tapped a command into a tablet, and the holographic display shifted, showing the live stock price of Harlow Construction. It was stable, but Isabel pointed to a series of underlying metrics invisible to the public. "The debt-to-equity ratio is worse than we thought. He's leveraged the Phoenix Tower project against nearly all the company's liquid assets. He's using future profits from a building that doesn't exist yet to finance his current operations. It's a house of cards." "He calls it vision," Liam said, his voice flat. He walked over to the glass wall, which was actually a floor-to-ceiling screen displaying a live satellite feed of the city. He zoomed in on the plot of land where the Phoenix Tower was to be built. "He's so obsessed with leaving his mark on the skyline that he's gambled the entire company on it." "A vulnerability we are prepared to exploit," Isabel said. "The final tranche of share purchases will be complete by Friday. We'll have a controlling interest. Once we initiate the margin call on his leverage assets, he'll have no choice but to cede control or face total bankruptcy. The board will abandon him in a heartbeat to save themselves." Liam stared at the image of the city. His city. He had spent his career learning its bones, its history, its soul. Richard wanted to impose his will upon it. Liam wanted to heal it. His plan for Harlow Construction wasn't to tear it down, but to transform it, to shift its focus from egotistical monuments to sustainable, human-centric design, projects that served communities, not just developers. "And Clara?" Isabel asked, her voice softening slightly. She was the only person on Earth who knew the full story. the emotional stakes behind the financial strategy. Liam's smile faded. He thought of her turning away from him at the gala. She's struggling. She made a choice last night. He reached into his pocket for his pen, the familiar weight a small comfort. She chose her father's world. And you? I'm about to show her what my world actually looks like, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Phase 1 is complete. Initiate Phase 2. I want the preliminary acquisition offer on Richard's desk by the end of the month. Sent from an anonymous subsidiary. Let him feel the ground start to shake. Up above on the street, Marcus Thorne was getting impatient. He had thermal imaging aimed at the building. Suite 201 was cold, no heat signature. No electronics running. It was empty. But Liam had never left. Thorne lowered the imager, completely baffled. He'd seen men use safe houses, secret apartments, back alley exits, but disappearing into thin air from the second floor of a commercial building? This was new. He made a note in his logbook. Subject is not what he seems. This is not about infidelity. This is about deception on a scale I have not encountered before. Recommend escalating surveillance. He had no idea that he was a pawn in a much larger game, and his next report to Clara would be the pebble that starts the avalanche. Clara read Marcus Thorne's preliminary report with a growing sense of bewilderment and fear. The words were clinical, detached, but they painted a picture of a life she couldn't reconcile with the man she married. Subject's daily routine is deceptive. Appears to work from Suite 201, but thermal and electronic scans confirm the office is a facade used only for entry and exit. Subject disappears within the building for 8 to 10 hours daily. His true location is unknown. He has no discernible social contacts during this time. No lunches, no meetings, no phone calls that can be traced. His financial footprint is impossibly small for a man of his profession. His declared income passes through his account and is used for household expenses, but there is no other activity. No investments, no savings, no credit. It's a digital ghost. A facade? A digital ghost? The words were chilling. The report didn't accuse him of having an affair, but in a way this was worse. An affair was a familiar, understandable betrayal. This was alien. It suggested a secret life so profound and all-encompassing that it made their entire marriage feel like a lie. Her initial suspicion, born of her family's scorn, had been that he was failing, and perhaps seeking comfort elsewhere. Now a new, more terrifying possibility began to form. What if he wasn't failing at all? What if he was succeeding at something she couldn't even begin to comprehend? And what if that success involved hiding everything from her? Her paranoia, now unmoored from the simple anchor of infidelity, spiraled. The long hours, the quiet evasiveness, the way he would sometimes look at her father with an unnerving placidity. It all began to reframe itself in a sinister new light. He wasn't weak. He was hiding something. He wasn't unambitious. His ambition was simply secret. That evening, she decided to confront him. Not with an accusation, but with a plea for honesty, laced with the poison of her suspicion. Liam was in his study, sketching in his notebook. The room was his sanctuary, filled with books on architectural theory and history. The soft scratch of his fountain pen on paper was the only sound. Liam, she began, her voice trembling slightly as she stood in the doorway. We need to talk. He looked up, his expression open, patient. Of course. What's on your mind? I feel like I don't know you anymore, she said, the words rushing out. You're distant. You're gone all day. And even when you're here, you're not really present. You're keeping things from me. I need to know what it is. Liam set his pen down carefully, marking his page. He looked at her, his gaze steady. I have a lot on my mind with work, Clara. A large project is reaching a critical stage. What project? She pressed, her voice rising. The library? You've been working on the library for a year. This is something else, isn't it? Something you're not telling me about. He saw the fear and suspicion warring in her eyes. He could end it right there. He could open the briefcase sitting by his desk, show her the preliminary drafts of the Ethelred plan, and explain everything. But he hesitated. The wound from the gala was still fresh. Her silence, her abandonment of him in the face of her father's cruelty, echoed in his memory. If he revealed his power now, Her reaction would be colored by it. She would be impressed, awed, perhaps even relieved. But would she be sorry? Would she understand the test she had failed? No, not yet. The lesson was not complete. It's complicated, he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. It was a weak answer, and he knew it. Complicated is what people say when they're hiding something, she retorted, her voice sharp with frustration. Are you in some kind of trouble, Liam? Financial trouble? Is that it? You can tell me. My father could help. The mention of her father was like a splash of ice water. No, Liam said, his voice dropping, losing its warmth. I don't need Richard's help. His rejection of her father's power was, to her, the ultimate confirmation. It meant the problem was either so shameful he couldn't bear to confess it, or so serious that even the great Richard Harlow couldn't fix it. Both possibilities were terrifying. Then what is it, she pleaded. Just talk to me. I promise you, Liam said, standing up and walking towards her, his voice low and earnest. Soon, everything will be clear. I just need you to trust me for a little while longer. But trust was a currency her family had devalued long ago. For the Harlows, trust was a foolish investment. Certainty was the only thing that mattered, and she was a Harlow, through and through. Looking at his calm, earnest face, she felt a surge of anger. He was patronizing her, treating her like a child who couldn't handle the truth. No, she said, her voice cold. I'm done waiting. She turned and left the room, leaving him standing in the silence. The chasm between them had widened into an impassable canyon. Liam closed his eyes, a profound sense of sorrow washing over him. He had given her one last chance to choose faith over fear, and she had chosen fear. The next morning, Clara called Marcus Thorne. I don't care what it costs, she said, her voice hard and brittle. I want to know what he's doing. I want to know where he goes, who he talks to, and what this project is. I want every detail. Whatever it is, I want it exposed. Thorne, on the other end of the line, listened patiently. Exposed, Mrs. Kincaid? Are you certain? Sometimes it's better not to turn over certain rocks. I'm certain, she snapped. Dig. As you wish, Thorne replied, a note of grim resignation in his voice. He hung up the phone. He now had a client who was demanding he uncover a truth she was clearly not prepared to handle. It was a situation he'd been in before, and it never ended well. But he was a professional. He would give his client what she paid for. He would deliver the truth. And he had a feeling that the truth, in this case, was going to be spectacular. The perfect stage for the final act was Richard and Eleanor Harlow's 40th wedding anniversary party. It was the social event of the season, a lavish affair held in a custom-built pavilion on the grounds of their sprawling estate. The air hummed with the conversations of the city's elite, bankers, judges, developers, and politicians. It was a room overflowing with power, a self-congratulatory ecosystem with Richard Harlow at its Sun King center. Clara moved through the crowd, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. In her clutch was a slim data stick, the culmination of Marcus Thorne's investigation. He had delivered it that afternoon with a stark warning. I strongly advise you to review this in private before you do anything, Mrs. Kincaid. But she hadn't. She was too afraid of what it might contain, and too eager to wield it as a weapon. She felt its presence like a cold, hard stone against her palm. Her plan, fueled by a toxic cocktail of fear, resentment, and her father's influence, was to force a confrontation, to expose Liam's secret life, whatever it was, and force him to finally be honest. She had convinced herself this was an act of tough love, a necessary surgery to save their marriage. Liam, by her side, was an image of unnerving tranquility. He greeted people with a polite smile, his calm a silent rebuke to her inner turmoil. To everyone else, they were the perfect couple. To Clara, they were strangers sharing the same space. The moment came after the main course. Richard, flushed with champagne and adulation, tapped a knife against his glass for silence. He stood to give a speech, a rambling toast to his wife that quickly pivoted to a celebration of his own success. 40 years with this beautiful woman, he began, beaming at Eleanor. And in that time, we've built more than a family. We've built a legacy, a dynasty. He paused for effect. And that legacy is about to reach its zenith. I am proud to announce tonight that financing for the Phoenix Tower is fully secured. The contracts are signed. Nothing can stop us now." The room erupted in applause. Richard's chest swelled with pride. He felt invincible, immortal. He was the master of his universe. As the applause died down, he caught Liam's eye across the room. He saw his son-in-law's quiet, watchful expression and felt a familiar flicker of irritation. He decided, in his moment of ultimate triumph, to deliver one final public lesson in status. Of course, Richard continued, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. Legacies come in all shapes and sizes. Even small ones have their place. Isn't that right, Liam? He gestured toward his son-in-law. Here's to Liam. May his libraries always be quiet, and his renovations historically accurate. The laughter was polite but pointed. It was the final humiliation, the last twist of the knife. Liam simply inclined his head, a gesture of acknowledgement that conceded nothing. But for Clara, it was the final straw. Her father's casual cruelty, Liam's infuriating passivity, and the weight of the data stick in her hand all converged into a single, reckless impulse. This was the moment. She would defend her husband, not by shielding him, but by forcing his own hidden strength, whatever it was, out into the open. She stood up, her movement abrupt, drawing the attention of the tables nearby. "Actually, Dad," she said, her voice louder than she intended, "Liam has been working on something big, a secret he's been keeping from all of us." A hush fell over the room. Richard looked at her, first with confusion, then with dawning amusement. He thought this was some kind of misguided attempt by Clara to defend her husband's honor. Liam's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of warning in their calm depths. "Don't do this, Clara." But she was past the point of listening. "He has a secret life," she announced, her voice gaining a hysterical edge. She held up the data stick. "And I have the proof right here. While you've all been laughing at him, he's been building something, lying to me, lying to all of us." Richard's amusement turned to concern. He saw the wild look in his daughter's eyes. "Clara, darling, perhaps you've had a bit too much champagne. Sit down." "No," she insisted, her gaze fixed on Liam. "I want him to tell everyone what he's been doing. I want him to stop hiding. Tell them, Liam. Tell them about your complicated project." The air was thick with tension. Everyone was staring, first at the distraught wife, then at the silent husband. Liam didn't move. He simply watched her, his expression one of profound, weary disappointment. He looked like a man watching a building he had lovingly constructed collapse in slow motion. "This is not the time or the place, Clara," he said, his voice low, but carrying in the silence. His refusal was all the fuel she needed. "I'm making it the time and the place." She fumbled with the data stick, looking around for a way to display its contents. "He's been deceiving us all." The scene was rapidly devolving from awkward to catastrophic. Richard started to move toward her, his face a mask of fury and embarrassment. But before he could reach her, a calm, unfamiliar voice cut through the tension. "Perhaps I can be of assistance." The voice came from the entrance of the pavilion. A man in a well-tailored but unassuming suit stood there. It was Marcus Thorne. His presence was a shock, a violation of the unspoken rules of his profession. He was not supposed to be here. He was supposed to be a ghost. Clara stared at him, her mouth agape. "What are you doing here?" Thorne ignored her. His eyes were on Liam. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of respect. Then he turned his gaze to Richard Harlow. "Mr. Harlow," he said, his voice clear and professional. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I was hired by your daughter to investigate her husband." He paused, letting the weight of that statement land. "However, my primary client in this matter is not Mrs. Kincaid." He walked forward, holding a thick, leather-bound portfolio. He didn't give it to Clara. He walked past her and placed it gently on the table in front of a stunned Richard Harlow. "My primary client," Thorne continued, "is the beneficial owner of Ethelred Acquisitions. He asked me to deliver this to you personally. It's the final binding offer for the purchase of a controlling interest in Harlow Construction, effective immediately." The room was utterly silent. The name Ethelred Acquisitions rippled through the financial heavyweights in the audience like a shockwave. Ethelred was a phantom, a voracious and mysterious investment firm that had been buying up distressed corporate assets with terrifying efficiency for the past 2 years. Their owner was famously anonymous. Richard stared at the portfolio as if it were a venomous snake. He looked from the portfolio to Thorn, then to Liam, a dawning, horrified comprehension on his face. Ethelred, he stammered. What does this have to do with him? Liam finally stood up. He walked calmly to the front of the room, standing beside a frozen Clara. He looked at his father-in-law, his eyes no longer placid, but filled with a cold, hard clarity. My apologies for the theatrics, Richard, Liam said, his voice quiet, but resonating with absolute authority. That wasn't my plan. He glanced at Clara. My hand was forced. Just then, the doors to the pavilion opened again. A woman with an aura of intense, focused power walked in. It was Isabel Vance. The whispers in the room grew to a stunned murmur. Isabel Vance was a legend, a shark. Her presence here was inexplicable. She walked directly to Liam's side. She nodded to Richard. Mr. Harlow, I am Isabel Vance, CEO of Ethelred Acquisitions. Richard could only stare. Vance, what is the meaning of this? Isabel smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. I believe there's been a misunderstanding about our corporate structure. I am the CEO, but I am not the owner. She turned and gestured toward Liam. Allow me to introduce you to the founder, the sole proprietor, and the architect of our entire strategy, Mr. Liam Kincaid. The statement landed. Simple. Devastating. Final. A collective gasp swept the room. Time seemed to stop. Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. She looked at Liam, her quiet, bookish husband, the man she pitied, the man she was about to publicly shame, and saw a complete stranger. The man standing before her now was radiating a power so immense, so absolute, it dwarfed her father's blustering authority into insignificance. The worn corduroy jackets, the modest car, the small office, it was all a costume. A brilliantly executed piece of camouflage. Richard Harlow swayed on his feet, his face turning a blotchy apoplectic red. He sank into his chair, his hand trembling as he reached for the portfolio. No, he whispered, the word a ragged exhalation of disbelief. It's impossible. Liam's gaze was fixed on him. There was no triumph in it, no gloating. There was only the quiet, implacable finality of a perfectly executed plan reaching its conclusion. Open it, Richard, he said. With fumbling fingers, Richard untied the ribbon on the portfolio. Inside, the top page was a summary of the acquisition. It detailed Ethelred's controlling share, purchased on the open market and through shell corporations over the past 18 months. It detailed the leveraging of the Phoenix Tower assets. It detailed the inescapable legal and financial trap that had closed around him. He was checkmated. He had been playing checkers while Liam was playing a grandmaster's game of chess, and he had never even seen the board. Why? Richard choked out, looking up at Liam, his arrogance shattered, replaced by a raw, desperate confusion. Why would you do this? This was the moment for the moral mirror, for the... Liam let the question hang in the air, forcing Richard to confront the chasm between his perception and reality. You asked me that night at your birthday dinner what my legacy would be, Liam began, his voice still quiet, yet every person in the pavilion leaned in to hear. You said legacy was about building great things, about scale. You dismissed my work. You dismissed me. He took a step closer, his eyes locked on his father-in-law. You judged my worth by the size of my projects and my apparent income. You never once asked me about the why of my work. You never asked about my passion for creating sustainable communities, for innovating building materials, for designing spaces that serve people, not just egos. He gestured around the opulent room. This world you've built, Richard, it's based on a single flawed principle, that a person's value is synonymous with their visible wealth and power. You taught that lesson to your children. You taught it to my wife. His gaze flickered to Clara, who stood as if turned to stone, her face pale, the data stick fallen from her hand and lying forgotten on the floor. I did this, Liam continued, his voice resonating with the weight of years of silent endurance, because Harlow Construction, under your leadership, has become a force for vanity, not progress. You build monuments to yourself. I intend to turn it into an engine for responsible, innovative architecture that will serve this city for a century. That will be my legacy. A legacy you were too blind to see, even when it was sitting at your own dinner table. He paused, letting the truth settle over the stunned audience. You didn't see me, Richard. You saw a reflection of your own narrow values. You saw a failure. But the failure was not in my ambition. It was in your perception. Richard tried to speak, to rally, but only a strangled noise came out. He was broken. The invincible patriarch, the king of the city's skyline, had been publicly and comprehensively dismantled. Not by a rival, not by a market crash, but by the quiet, unassuming man he had so casually and cruelly despised. Clara finally found her voice, a small, broken whisper. Liam, I didn't know. Liam turned to her, and for the first time she saw not love, not anger, but a vast, sorrowful distance in his eyes. That, he said softly, the words a quiet bomb that shattered what was left of her heart, is the entire problem. The immediate aftermath was a symphony of chaos conducted in hushed, frantic tones. The anniversary party disintegrated. Guests, sensing the seismic shift in the city's power structure, began to melt away. Their hurried goodbyes to the Harlows now tinged with a new cautious deference when they glanced at Liam. They were rats deserting a sinking ship and trying to board the new flagship in a single fluid motion. Richard Harlow remained slumped in his chair, a man hollowed out. He stared at the open portfolio, at the meticulously detailed evidence of his own demise. His empire, his identity, was gone. He looked up at Liam, his eyes pleading. The blustering tyrant was gone, replaced by a frightened old man. You can't do this, Liam, he rasped, his voice thin and reedy. This company is my life. It's my name. It's just a name, Richard, Liam replied, his voice devoid of malice. It was the calm voice of a surgeon, explaining a necessary amputation. And the company will live on. It will just have a new purpose, a better one. I'll fight you, Richard threatened, but the words had no force. I'll sue. I'll tell the press what you did, deceiving your own family. Isabel Vance, who had been standing silently by, stepped forward. I would advise against that, Mr. Harlow, she said, her tone as cold and sharp as ice. Our acquisition is legally ironclad. Any public statement you make will be met with a countersuit for libel and an immediate release of the forensic accounting of your more creative financial practices over the past decade. I assure you the board members who are currently abandoning you will happily testify against you to secure their own immunity. Richard paled. He knew she was right. He had been outmaneuvered at every turn. He was trapped. Liam's attention, however, was on Clara. She stood frozen, her mind a maelstrom of shock, shame, and a terrifying, dawning clarity. Every dismissive joke, every moment of her own silent complicity, every time she had wished Liam were more like her father, it all came rushing back, now cast in the horrifying light of the truth. She hadn't just been blind, she had been a willing participant in her own husband's humiliation. Liam, she whispered, taking a hesitant step toward him. I'm so sorry. I was a fool. Liam looked at her, and the distance in his eyes was heartbreaking. He wasn't angry. Anger would have been easier to bear. This was something worse. It was disillusionment. It was the quiet grief of a man realizing the foundation of his house was built on sand. Sorry for what, exactly, Clara? He asked, his voice gentle but insistent. It was a genuine question, a final test. Are you sorry for not believing in me? Or are you sorry that you bet on the wrong horse? The question struck her with the force of a physical blow, because she didn't know the answer. In that moment of raw, brutal honesty, she couldn't separate her shame from her shock at his power. Was her regret born of love and loyalty, or of the sudden, humiliating realization that she had aligned herself with the losing side? That's not fair, she stammered, tears beginning to stream down her face. Isn't it? He pressed, his voice still soft. Let me ask you another question. When you hired Mr. Thorne, you suspected I was having an affair. What if he had come back with pictures of me and another woman? What would you have done? I would have been heartbroken, she sobbed. I know, but would you have left me? Yes, of course. Okay, Liam said, nodding slowly. Now, What if Mr. Thorne had come back with a different report? What if he had discovered that my little firm was failing, that I was secretly drowning in debt and on the verge of bankruptcy? What would you have done then, Clara? Would you have stood by me? Would you have defended me from your father's I told you so's? Would you have told me it didn't matter, that we would face it together? He didn't need her to answer. The answer was written in her horrified silence. It was in the way her eyes darted away, unable to meet his. She knew, and he knew, that she would have been ashamed. She would have seen it as a confirmation of her family's judgment. Her support would have crumbled. He let the silence stretch, a damning indictment of her character. You see, he finally said, the sorrow in his voice absolute. The problem isn't that you thought I was having an affair. The problem is that my success is more shocking to you than my infidelity would have been. The problem is that you value strength, but you can only recognize it when it's loud and boastful and looks like your father. He turned to leave, his presence no longer required. The demolition was complete. Isabel and a team of lawyers who had entered discreetly were now speaking with the remaining board members of Harlow Construction, their voices low and efficient as they began the process of transition. Liam, wait, Clara cried, reaching for his arm. He stopped but didn't turn around. I think we both need some time, Clara, he said, his back to her. You need to figure out who you are without your father's name, and I need to figure out if the man you married still exists. He gently pulled his arm free and walked out of the pavilion, leaving her alone in the ruins of her life, the cheers and applause of her father's triumph, now a mocking echo in the wreckage. The days that followed were a blur of cold, hard consequences. The news of the Ethelred acquisition of Harlow Construction broke in the financial press, sending shockwaves through the industry. The narrative, carefully shaped by Isabel Vance's PR team, was one of a necessary course correction. A visionary firm rescuing a legacy company from the reckless, ego-driven leadership of its aging founder. Richard Harlow's name, once a synonym for power, became a cautionary tale overnight. He tried to fight as he had threatened. He called emergency board meetings, but his allies had vanished. Faced with the evidence of his financial mismanagement and the promise of a prosperous future under Ethelred, the board unanimously voted to approve the takeover and remove him as CEO. He was offered a ceremonial title, Chairman Emeritus, a gilded cage with no power, which he refused in a fit of impotent rage. He was locked out of the building he had built, his nameplate removed from the door of the office that had been his throne. Clara, in the meantime, existed in a state of suspended animation. She was living in their beautiful home, but it felt like a museum of a dead marriage. Liam didn't come home. He was staying in a suite at a downtown hotel, a detail she learned not from him, but from a brief, courteous email from his new assistant. The email also informed her that all her credit cards, which were tied to a joint account Liam had funded, were still active and the household bills would continue to be paid. It was a gesture of profound, chilling politeness. He was ensuring her comfort while simultaneously severing their connection. She tried calling him, but his old number was disconnected. She sent texts and emails filled with frantic apologies, desperate pleas, and confused outpourings of her own shame. They all went unanswered. The silence was his judgment. About a week after the party, she drove to her parents' estate. She found her father in his study. Not the grand office downtown, but a smaller, darker room filled with relics of his past glories. He was surrounded by framed newspaper clippings and architectural models of his completed buildings, a king in exile amidst his own history. He looked 10 years older, the bullish energy gone, replaced by a brittle, defeated slump. He's destroying it, Richard said, without looking up as she entered. He's canceling the Phoenix Tower. He's liquidating the luxury condo division. He's turning my company into a charity. He's shifting to sustainable urban development and public-private partnerships, Dad, Clara said, the words sounding foreign and strange in her mouth. She had read the press releases, trying to understand the man she had married. He's building affordable housing and retrofitting public buildings for energy efficiency. It's pathetic, Richard spat, slamming his fist on the desk. There's no glory in that, no legacy. Maybe that's the point, Clara said softly. Maybe the legacy isn't supposed to be a giant glass tower with your name on it. Richard finally looked at her, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Whose side are you on, after what he did to us? To you? And that was the question, wasn't it? The question Liam had put to her. It echoed in her head day and night, and she looked at her father, at his self-pity and his complete inability to see his own role in his downfall, and for the first time she saw him not as a titan, but as a small man, terrified of being forgotten. She saw the source of the poison that had infected her own thinking. He didn't do this to us, Dad, she said, her voice shaking but clear. He did it because of what you did to him. What I let you do to him. For years, we mocked him. We dismissed him. We treated him like he was nothing, because he wasn't like you. We never bothered to see who he truly was. We just saw who he wasn't. The confession hung in the air, a painful, liberating truth. Richard stared at her, speechless. He had expected an ally in his misery, but his daughter was holding up a mirror to his own arrogance. I need to go, Clara said, turning to leave. She couldn't fix her father. She could barely begin to fix herself. She went home and did the one thing she had control over. She called a financial advisor, not one of her father's cronies, but a woman whose name she found online, someone who specialized in ethical investing. She began the process of understanding her own finances, the trust fund her grandfather had left her, the assets she had never bothered to look at, because her father and then Liam had always just handled everything. She started to untangle herself from the Harlow safety net, a net that had turned out to be a trap. It was a small step, but it was hers. 2 weeks later, she received a formal-looking envelope. It was from Liam's lawyers. Her hands trembled as she opened it, expecting divorce papers. But it wasn't. It was a simple one-page letter. It was Liam's quiet, devastating question from the night of the party, typed out on the page. What if Mr. Thorne had discovered that my little firm was failing, that I was secretly drowning in debt and on the verge of bankruptcy? What would you have done then, Clara? Below the typed question was a single handwritten sentence in his familiar, elegant script. When you have an honest answer, you know how to reach me. The letter was not an ending, it was a challenge. It was a demand for introspection so profound it terrified her. He wasn't asking for an apology. He was asking for a complete reconstruction of her character. He was asking her to build a foundation of her own, and only then, maybe, they could see if anything could be built upon it together. The weeks turned into a month, then 2. Clara's life transformed. The grand house felt hollow, so she put it on the market, moving into a small, elegant apartment in the city. She sold a significant portion of her trust fund assets, taking the capital and enrolling in business courses at the local university. The society pages that had once chronicled her every move were now filled with speculation about the reclusive new titan, Liam Kincaid, and the revolutionary work being done by the newly rebranded Ethelred Harlow Group. Liam, true to his word, was reshaping the company. The Phoenix Tower project was officially canceled. In its place, he announced a partnership with the city to develop the land into a mixed-use community, featuring a public park, affordable housing units, and a state-of-the-art vocational school for the building trades. The project was less profitable, but its social and environmental impact was immeasurable. He was trading glory for purpose. One afternoon, Liam was reviewing blueprints in his new office, the same minimalist, high-tech space deep beneath the city, when Isabel walked in. "You have a visitor," she said, her tone neutral. "I'm not taking meetings today, Isabel." "I think you'll want to take this one," she replied. "It's Richard Harlow." Liam looked up, surprised. He had not heard from his father-in-law since the party. He had expected legal challenges, angry letters, perhaps a smear campaign in a sympathetic newspaper, but there had been only silence. "Send him in." Richard entered the office, and Liam was struck by how much he had diminished. The expensive suit hung loosely on his frame, and the arrogant fire in his eyes was gone, replaced by a weary, hollowed-out look. He looked around the vast, futuristic space, a place of quiet, immense power that made his own former corner office seem gaudy and loud. "This is where you did it," Richard said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "All this time, you were down here." "Yes," Liam said simply, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit." Richard ignored the chair. He walked to the glass wall, looking at the satellite feed of the city. He zoomed in on the plot of land where his tower was supposed to be. The Phoenix, he murmured. They're calling your new project the Commons. A ridiculous name. It's for everyone, Liam said. That's the point. Richard was silent for a long time, his shoulders slumped. I came here, he finally said, his back still to Liam, to ask for a job. Liam was taken aback. A job. Not a real one, Richard clarified, turning around. His face was etched with a painful, humiliating vulnerability. I know I have no power. You made sure of that. But my name? The Harlow name? It still means something to the old guard. The unions, the suppliers, there are men who have worked with me for 40 years. They don't trust your new people. He took a deep breath, the effort costing him dearly. Let me be a consultant, a liaison. I can help smooth the transition, keep the old loyalties from turning into resentment. It was an astonishing admission of defeat, but it was also something more. It was the first time Richard had ever acknowledged a value beyond his own authority. He was offering to trade his pride for a sliver of continued relevance, a way to avoid fading into complete obscurity. He was, in his own broken way, trying to find a new purpose. Liam studied him. He saw the desperation, but he also saw a flicker of something else, a pragmatic understanding of his new reality. He could have refused. He could have savored the moment, the final total victory of seeing his tormentor beg. But that was Richard's way, not his. The position would be unpaid, Liam said, his voice even. It would be advisory only. You would report to Isabel's operational director. You would have no executive authority. Richard nodded, his eyes on the floor. I understand. All right, Liam said. Isabel will have a contract drawn up. A wave of relief washed over Richard's face, so profound it was almost painful to watch. Thank you, he mumbled, then turned and left without another word, a ghost leaving the palace of the man who had deposed him. It wasn't forgiveness. It was not redemption. It was simply a practical solution, and perhaps the smallest possible seed of a new beginning for a man who had lost everything. Later that day, Liam found a simple hand-delivered envelope on his desk. He recognized Clara's handwriting. Inside was not a letter, but a business proposal. It was a detailed, well-researched plan for a small nonprofit foundation dedicated to providing scholarships for women and minorities in architecture and urban planning. It was smart, passionate, and meticulously put together. Tucked inside the proposal was a single sheet of paper. On it, in her own handwriting, she had finally answered his question. If I had learned you were failing, I would have been ashamed. I would have been disappointed. I would have seen you through my father's eyes, and our marriage would likely have ended, not with a bang, but with a slow, sad fizzle of my own cowardice. I am more ashamed of that truth than I can possibly say. I spent my whole life valuing the wrong things, and I am trying every day to learn how to build something of my own on a better foundation. This is my first attempt. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm just showing you my work. Liam read the words, and for the first time in months, he felt the vast, cold distance between them shrink, just a little. She hadn't made excuses. She hadn't begged. She had faced the ugliest part of herself and owned it. And then, she had started to build something new from the wreckage. He picked up his phone and sent her a text, his first direct communication in 3 months. It's a strong proposal. The foundation will need a good architect on its advisory board. I know a guy who might be interested. Her reply came a minute later, a single word. When? The final resolution was not a dramatic reunion. There were no soaring declarations of love, no immediate return to the life they had known. That life was gone forever. Instead, it was something quieter, more fragile, and infinitely more real. They met for coffee in a small, neutral cafe in a part of the city that held no memories for them. It felt like a first date between two strangers who knew each other's deepest secrets. Clara looked different. She wore a simple dress, her hair was tied back, and the expensive jewelry she once favored was gone. But the change was more than cosmetic. The nervous, eager-to-please energy was gone, replaced by a quiet self-possession. She spoke about her business classes, about the challenges of setting up the foundation, her eyes bright with a passion he hadn't seen in years. It was the passion of creation, of building something that was entirely her own. Liam, in turn, talked about his work at Ethelred Harlow. He spoke of the Commons Project, of the challenges in shifting a corporate culture from profit at all costs to purpose-driven development. He spoke not as a titan of industry, but as an architect, an idealist grappling with the messy reality of bringing a vision to life. My father took the job, Clara said, stirring her coffee. He called me. He actually sounded grateful. He's been useful, Liam admitted. The old guard listens to him. It's strange. In his defeat, he's found a way to be more valuable than he was when he was in charge. Maybe you need to lose everything to figure out what's actually worth keeping, Clara mused, her eyes meeting his. It wasn't an apology. It was an observation, a lesson learned in the crucible of her own loss. Liam saw in her eyes the woman he had first fallen in love with, the smart, compassionate woman who had been buried for years under the weight of her family's expectations. The foundation she was building was not just a nonprofit, it was a new version of herself. I've been going to therapy, she said, the admission quiet but firm, to understand why I believed what I did for so long, why I needed my father's approval so much that I was willing to sacrifice my own integrity. She looked down at her hands. I have a long way to go. So do I, Liam said, and he meant it. His victory had come at a cost. It had forced him into a level of deception and strategic cruelty that sat uneasily with him. He had won, but he had to ensure the victory didn't corrupt him in the same way power had corrupted Richard. He had to learn how to wield his influence without becoming the monster he had fought. The conversation flowed easily after that. They talked for hours, not about the past, but about the future, about ideas, about architecture and philanthropy and the city they both loved. The power dynamic that had defined and then destroyed their marriage was gone. In its place was a tentative, fragile equality. As they prepared to leave, Liam reached into his pocket and placed his fountain pen on the table, the Mont Blanc, his symbolic anchor. My mentor gave me this when I graduated, he said. He told me, an architect's first job is to see the truth of a place. The foundation, the structure, the stress points. You can't build anything lasting on a lie. He looked at her. I think that's true for relationships too. We were living a lie, Clara, for a long time. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I know. Can a new foundation be built? I don't know, Liam answered honestly. But for the first time in a long time, I think it might be worth trying to find out. He suggested couples counseling. She agreed immediately. The story doesn't end with them walking off into the sunset. It ends with the beginning of the hard work. It ends with two people, stripped of their old identities, choosing to start over from scratch, on a foundation of brutal honesty and hard-won self-awareness. True worth isn't measured by the height of the towers we build, but by the strength and integrity of the foundations we lay, both in our cities and in our hearts. Arrogance builds on sand, but humility, patience, and truth can build on bedrock. What do you think? Can a relationship truly recover from a betrayal of identity like this one? Is Clara's transformation genuine, or is it just a reaction to Liam's newfound power? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective makes these stories so much richer. And if you found yourself holding your breath during that final confrontation, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You have no idea what we have planned next. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.